say 2 minutes time?
Yeah, sure.
Good afternoon, Prabir.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. I can see you.
Thank you.
Well,
Very much.
yes, sir. And also voice is clear. Absolutely. May I request Ambassador Khobragade to fix your camera because we can't see you properly. Yeah, this is fine. Absolutely. Yes, this is fine, sir. Absolutely. All our speakers are here. You can see Dr. Lawrence, Ms. Joanna Lin from ISIS, Mr. Wafa Karishma from CSIS in Jakarta, and Professor Panda, of course, he has joined. So you welcome all the speakers and also many others who have joined from different missions in Delhi and also Indian missions in different ASEAN countries. I can see Mr. Kodamal, the co-chair ASEAN-India Business Council. So it's quite a good number of people have joined actually today. Thank you very much. So Professor Chaudhary, shall we start? It says 2:30 dot.
Please, Prabir. Yeah.
Right. So friends, welcome to RIS ASEAN Center webinar. We call it webinar 1 because there is a series of webinars to commemorate 30 years of ASEAN-India partnerships in 2022. This is the 30th year, very important year for bilateral relation between India and ASEAN. To start the commemorations from ASEAN-India Center at RIS and in partnerships with several other think tanks in the region. We are organizing today the webinar 1, which is the evolving strategic architecture in Indo-Pacific, perspectives from India and ASEAN. We have 4 important dignitaries with us to give remarks, their wisdom with us. Starting the webinar 1, I see Professor Chaturvedi, Director General RIS, His Excellency Mr. Ung Sen, Ambassador, Royal Embassy of Cambodia in New Delhi, Ambassador Jayant N. Khobragade, Indian Ambassador to ASEAN, Indian Mission in Jakarta. The panelists, Ms. Joanna Lin, Dr. Professor Rajaram Panda, Ms. Lin from ASEAN Study Center in ISAS Yusof Institute in Singapore. Professor Panda is a very well-known scholar in the region. He is with now Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. Mr. Wafa Karishma, researcher in CSIS in Jakarta, and Professor Lawrence Prabhakar Williams, Madras Christian College in Chennai. The panel discussion and the entire webinar 1 moderated by Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, the distinguished fellow, Gateway House in Mumbai, is very well known to us as well. So, and with us, I have a team from RIS, Dr. Sampa Kundu, who is a consultant at AIC, Dr. Nida Rehman, Mr. Sriyapan, and many others, RIS administration, and many others, colleagues from RIS who have joined also. I can say from ASEAN-India Business Council, our mission in Bangkok, in Manila, and many other places who have joined and who are in the process of joining. I welcome all of you to this 1 hour 30 minutes very intense discussion on evolving strategic architecture in Indo-Pacific perspective from India and ASEAN. I'm also happy to see Ms. Geetika Srivastava, the Joint Secretary, Minister of External Affairs, who has joined, and many other divisions of the MEA who are also maybe listening through our YouTube live. So with that, I welcome all of you to today's webinar, and I request Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General, RIS, to give his opening remarks. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Prabir Dey. Thanks for your leadership on ASEAN work program on India-ASEAN partnership. Thanks a lot for setting the context for today's discussion. I join you in welcoming His Excellency Mr. Hun Sen, the Ambassador of Royal Embassy of Cambodia to New Delhi, our own very dear friend, Ambassador Jayant Kobargade, who has been a well-wisher, and I had great pleasure in meeting him several times before he left for ASEAN. We had detailed discussions about India-ASEAN partnership. I also joined Prabir in acknowledging presence of Ms. Geetika Srivastava, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Dr. Panda, Professor Williams, and Mr. Wafa Kharsima, and also Ms. Lin. I think excellent panel, friends and colleagues, is lined up today, and we are very happy that the idea that RIS started working, and I joined RIS back in '91, and I found our teams working on India-ASEAN partnership. It was right in 1992 that RIS with Dr. V.L. Rao and Professor Ram Upendra Das came out with the first paper on sectoral dialogue partnership in 1992. RIS released that paper. And since then, RIS has been very actively contributing on various facets of India-ASEAN partnership. And I'm so glad to see this year, when we are celebrating 30 years of our partnership, we are realizing immense potential and what is still left to be done. And as Prabir very rightly pointed out, there are several areas where we need to work upon. There are several opportunities that we need to address. The excellent background note that Prabir and his team, Sampa, and all have contributed is, I think, a ready reckoner in terms of evolution of India-ASEAN partnership. The Look East policy, the Act East policy are bedrock for that innovation at the policy level. But the P2P partnership have been the strength of India-ASEAN partnership, which is again built on the legacy of historical, civilizational, and cultural ties, which have prospered and have given space for new economic partnerships in new areas that have emerged in last 30 years and are all set to take us forward. RIS has tried in its own unique ways in terms of the think tank partnerships, the idea of Delhi Dialogue, and also other platforms through publications where we have demonstrated India's commitment, but also rigor of academic analysis of our first-hand experience in terms of data collection, its synthesis, and also partnering with our individual think tanks and research institutions among ASEAN countries for we to take that forward. Friends and colleagues, there are several areas in which we have been prospering and have been trying to take the shared history and cultural relations forward. The decades of efforts that have gone in, I think they require, in terms of the direction that AEP, the Act East policy, requires, and its larger context of Indo-Pacific. The idea of deepening our partnership also hangs on the three pillars of political security, economic, and socio-cultural dimensions on which we are basing. Our idea and the target of 2025 to have $200 billion trade investment linkages that are important, and how we provide Philip to some of these activities to multiply and bring in the recently sort of initiated cooperation program with COVID-19 have provided new context to our partnership. Our idea of vaccine equity at the global level, India's own growing profile and ability to contribute at the global level in terms of new vaccines, in terms of providing and number of support measures. I think CLMV countries are partners in this effort to develop value chains, and also in terms of how we bring in resilience in our supply chains. The idea is also in terms of bringing in the MSMEs, the small and medium enterprises, the micro enterprises, which provide great strength for our digital technologies and our ability to bring in digital health. Prime Minister Modi has been talking about digitalizing the health sector cooperation, bringing in fintech as part of India's own development experience, and trying to see how fintech corridors can be established for facilitating trade and also reducing the transaction cost among our countries. And we are committed in terms of the digital infrastructure that we require. The idea of trilateral highway, the team that my colleague, Professor Prabir Dey, Dr. Priyadarshi Dash, and others led with IRIA, has done excellent work in terms of taking the idea of partnership with Thailand and Myanmar to Laos and Cambodia. How trilateral highway can provide this dimension. The issue is also of e-commerce and our ability to connect. So four areas that I have mentioned are very clear in terms of trade, investment, and value chain, infrastructure and connectivity, health, vaccine, and cooperation, and digital infrastructure, if I can just quickly summarize. So I think we have an excellent panel to take this dialogue forward. We very keenly await the outcome, and as Prabir has already announced, we would have series of these seminars, and I'm sure the excellent, well-accomplished panel that we have, and Ambassador Bhatia would be chairing the next panel. I'm sure we would have several policy relevant suggestions to come in to provide sort of support for our partnership and taking that forward. I once again thank His Excellency Ambassador Aung Sen for his very kind presence today, and Ambassador Jayant Khobargade for joining us this session. I once again very warmly welcome each one of you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Prabir, you are on mute.
Sorry about it. A technical glitch from my side. Sorry about it. Thank you very much, Professor Chaturvedi, for an excellent opening remarks and setting the tone for this panel. May I now invite His Excellency Mr. Aung San, the Ambassador, Royal Embassy of Cambodia. Ambassador Aung San serves as the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Cambodia to India, then Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, Iran, and Pakistan since 2018. Prior to ambassadorial seats, he was the Secretary of the State Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Cambodia. His Excellency, the floor is yours.
A very good afternoon to everybody.
Good afternoon to you.
Dear Dr. Pradir Dey, Professor and Coordinator, ASEAN-India Center, AIC, RIS, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General, RIS, His Excellency Jayant Khobargade, Indian Ambassador to ASEAN, distinguished panelists from India and ASEAN countries, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me to convey my sincere thanks to the ASEAN-India Center at RIS for inviting me to deliver an address at today's webinar on evolving strategic architecture in Indo-Pacific. perspective from India and ASEAN. It is indeed my great pleasure to meet all prominent speakers who will share their thoughts and ideas on the above topic. This year is significant for Cambodia and India as we celebrate the 70 years anniversary of diplomatic relations. During phone conversation between His Excellency Mr. Prak Sokhonn, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and His Excellency Dr. S. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs of India on 10 January 2022, both sides agreed to exchange visit and jointly organize meaningful events in respective countries to celebrate our 70 years of bilateral relation. I am optimistic that the exchange of visit will provide an opportunity for both sides to work more closely to advance the relation to new heights. The year 2022 is a special year for Cambodia as it functions as a rotating chair of ASEAN for the third time. Cambodia has chosen this year's theme, ASEAN Act, that means addressing challenge together. The idea is to highlight the importance of ASEAN's spirit as a united family of 10. With a strong sense of togetherness in jointly acting for results to achieve common goal. In togetherness, we want to emphasize ASEAN centrality, unity, and solidarity in addressing regional challenges and enhancing ASEAN's contribution to regional and global peace, stability, security, and sustainable development. In addressing the geopolitical and strategic rivalry, Cambodia, as chair of ASEAN, we seek to strengthen ASEAN centrality in ASEAN-led architecture to maintain peace, security, prosperity. We will focus on the reinforcement of multilateralism and multilateral processes through ASEAN-led mechanism. This year is also special for ASEAN-India relations as it marks their 30 years anniversary of relations and the 10th anniversary of strategic partnership. During the 18th ASEAN-India Summit held in October 2021, the leader agreed to designate this year as ASEAN-India Friendship to commemorate the relation anniversary. As the chair of ASEAN, Cambodia is ready to cooperate with India and Singapore, country coordinator for ASEAN-India, in organizing and celebrating this wonderful occasion. On 16 February 2022, ASEAN Som leader welcomed India's intention to host a special ASEAN-India Foreign Minister meeting in New Delhi. I am of the view that this special ASEAN-India Foreign Minister meeting and the ASEAN-India Commemorative Summit held later this year will promote an excellent opportunity for both sides to engage in dialogue where we can explore more tangible cooperation within the strategic partnership. I am very pleased to see that the ASEAN-India strategic partnership being gradually strengthened. The elevation of the level of strategic partnership in 2022 was a critical milestone in bilateral relations between ASEAN and India. Indeed, ASEAN lies in the center of Indo-Pacific, a region of dynamic and economic growth. ASEAN has adopted the outlook on the Indo-Pacific AOIP at the 34th ASEAN Summit in 2029. In 2019, the AOIP is one of the key regional initiatives to navigate ASEAN through world great power rivalry, through the strengthening ASEAN norm, promoting ASEAN centrality, connecting ASEAN with other regional mechanisms in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. During the 18th ASEAN-India Summit last year, both sides agreed to explore potential cooperation between the AOIP and the India Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, IPOI, including in the 4 areas outlined in the AOIP, namely maritime cooperation, connectivity, the sustainable development goal, and economic and other possible areas of cooperation. ASEAN welcomes all major initiatives that are not intended for creating rivalry, but instead complementing the existing mechanism so that they would bring about stability, security, peace, and prosperity to the region based on mutual respect, mutual understanding, and mutual benefit. Our Indo-Pacific strategy should focus on economic cooperation and sustainable development. Let me end my remark by expressing my sincere thanks to the IIC once for arranging this important webinar. I am also keen to listen the views shared by scholars from ASEAN and India during their panel discussion on the strategic architecture of Indo-Pacific. Thank you for kind attention.
Thank you very much. Huge value to our discussion, and our panel discussion follows. Do I invite Ambassador Jayant Khobragade, Indian Ambassador to ASEAN? And he has done his postings, including Indian missions. Saab is in December. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
To you.
So, dear Professor Chaturvedi, Dr. Day, Ambassador Bhatia, Ambassador Ungshan, Gitika, Tato Ramesh Kodamal, and distinguished panelists and attendees. It's indeed a great pleasure. Professor Chaturvedi Saab, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for remembering, our interactions before my arrival to Jakarta. It indeed was very, very useful because you have been involved, and RIS has been involved since the beginning of the relationship between India and ASEAN. So while, for the webinar, as Dr. Day says that, it's going to talk about, evolving strategic architecture in Indo-Pacific. My focus would be to put, ASEAN-India relationship in that context. So I take lead from my esteemed colleague from Cambodia. And as everyone knows, India established relations with ASEAN in 1992. So thus, in the last 3 decades, the world has changed substantially. India-ASEAN establishing relationship almost coincided with the end of Cold War. A multipolar world became a reality since then. In this context, the regional groups such as ASEAN and India establishing and deepening partnership assumes special significance. In fact, in the post-pandemic world, as the trends indicate, the world will be more multipolar, which is already a reality and aspiration. 30 years down the lane, the ASEAN has become heart of the Indo-Pacific by itself by announcing AOIP as well as from the perspective of the global community. No other region probably is as much discussed constructively as Indo-Pacific these days. The audience would have noted the announcement of upcoming visit of Honorable EM to Germany and France, wherein both the countries, the minister is scheduled to speak on Indo-Pacific theme. While in the geopolitical sense, it has got traction these days, India has added advantage of its historical linkages in the ancient, medieval, and modern history, which is reflected in monuments and traditions, values, and people. India envisages a free, open, inclusive, peaceful, and prosperous Indo Pacific built on a rules based order. The region, with freedom of navigation and overflight, unimpeded lawful commerce, with sustainable and transparent investments, mutual respect for sovereignty, peaceful resolution of disputes. India's vision of the Indo-Pacific is positive with constructive approach, inclusive of nations in its geography and beyond who have stake in it. Thus, if one has to approximately set the context of India's 30 years of partnership with ASEAN, it will be between these two eras, end of Cold War and rising profile of Indo-Pacific, shaping the geopolitical realities of our times. A lot has happened during this entire period. ASEAN and India together have passed through the ups and downs, faced and dealt with challenges together, extended a hand of help to each other whenever it was required, whether it was the financial crisis of late 90s or the ongoing COVID pandemic. The relationship matured in stages. It went from sectoral dialogue partnership to full dialogue, then summit level partnership becoming strategic. Even a casual look at the statements made by our leadership, including Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable External Affairs Minister, can give the glimpses of the depth of relationship. It is not limited just to the ASEAN-India space, but goes much beyond that and touches the issues of global interest from countering terrorism to ensuring sustainability. When we talk about India making a qualitative shift from qualitative shift from lookist to actist policy and subsequently announcing and synergizing its Indo-Pacific initiative with that of ASEAN, it has also done it in coherence with other regional initiatives such as security and growth in the region, popularly known as SAGAR, or a broader or on a broader sense, and the approaching to the region through plurilateral, constructive, and complementary arrangements such as Quad. Through the initiatives under them and policy statements, it is nobody's guess that they are all in harmony with each other. The successive joint statements reiterated India's policy towards this region. While one group of the statements called for ASEAN's unity and its integration, ASEAN centrality in the evolving regional architecture, which is seen through CLMV and Mekong Ganga initiatives, etc. The other set of statements talked about serious geopolitical issues and how India and ASEAN can collaborate in all their dimensions to face the contemporary challenges, be it pandemic or be it countering terrorism. This year marks 10 years of completion of strategic partnership. The 2018 Delhi Declaration issued by the leaders commemorating 25th anniversary of relationship in New Delhi both sums up and defines elements of the strategic partnership between ASEAN and India. They encompass the entire gamut of relationship, including political security, economic, socio-cultural, regional, and international issues. India and ASEAN work together in maintaining and promoting peace, stability, maritime safety and security, freedom of navigation, and overflight in this region, other lawful uses of the seas and unimpeded lawful maritime commerce, and strive to ensure open, transparent, inclusive, rule-based regional architecture through existing ASEAN-led frameworks and mechanisms. The esteemed audience is well aware of ASEAN and the ASEAN-led mechanisms such as East Asia Summit and ASEAN Regional Forum. India is fully involved in these processes. As Honorable Prime Minister has described, East Asia is a key forum for shaping the collective future of the region. The collaborative activities are listed in the successive plan of actions approved by the leadership, and their implementation is noted by them. The leadership has thought of a clear, mutually beneficial strategy that binds us in the regional and global context. Thus, from the mission's perspective, I might say that in the coming days, while effort is always to take the relationship in its entirety to a higher level, the focus areas will include digital connectivity, cooperation in cyberspace, entire gamut of maritime domain, institutional linkages, etc., all leading to making the partnership comprehensive. As I mentioned in the beginning, the beginning of the relationship between India and ASEAN coincided with the end of Cold War. In the settings of Indo-Pacific, this relationship has been contributing and reflective of a multipolar world which aspires to be more stable and secure. Thank you so much.
Prabir, you are on mute. I think there is some connectivity issue at the end. Prabir, can you hear us? Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you. The connectivity is back now. Thank you very much, Ambassador Khobraga. The last time when I got disconnected because of the technical glitches. So thank you very much presenting the entire spectrum of the ASEAN-India relations. And also you give us the current challenges, very much relevant to our webinar subject. Thank you very much, sir, once again. This ends our inaugural session. Before I hand over to our eminent chairperson for the next panel, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, I can also make it here that we have with us Alice Cheng, the Deputy Chief of Mission in Singapore High Commission in Delhi, former Secretary East, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan, and I can see Dr. Vidyavati from Ambassador Khobraga's colleague in there, Professor Nomis Bolia, who handles our the 1,000 scholarship program. It's called DIA. Its name is given DIA, very nice name. And also Mark Dijon, the Philippines embassy in Delhi. So with that, I invite Ambassador Bhatia to chair the very important panel. I introduce Ambassador Bhatia. Everybody knows him well, and even then, and please allow me to introduce him. Ambassador Bhatia is a distinguished fellow foreign studies program at the Gateway House. He is also the member of CII International Advisory Council, and he is also chair of FICCI's Blue Task Force and Blue Economy. He was the former Director General from 2012 to 15 to the ICWA, and Ambassador Bhatia is also prolific authors. You will see his op-eds and the book which attracted my mind, and certainly, please try to see is if you are interested in India-Africa relations. He's came out with a book from prestigious Routledge, India-Africa relation, Changing Horizons. So with that, I invite Ambassador Bhatia to take the chair and lead the panel discussions. You will be assisted by my colleague, Dr. Sampa Kundu, and we are here to moderate, assisting you in Q&A sessions and other assistance. Thank you, sir. I thank everyone who have joined in the panel, in the inaugural sessions. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope I can.
Yes, you are audible, yes.
Okay, thank you. It's a real pleasure to moderate session, host yes, and ask center. This is where policymakers interact with scholars, and particularly that we have had opportunity to Professor Chatur, and then the two actors, they both put an extremely super and bad view of the entire spectrum of it. And this makes our task, this particular, much easier because critical parameters have been very clearly marked out. Now, let's I want to write greet our panelists. There are 10 from the ASEAN, and there is one the Indian side, and this is how we should be listening to the voices much more where the host institute. So be getting a chance in all the panels one by one. Now the way understood this series NAS years of ASEAN partnership. This one in particular is focused on having a structure, the strategic of Indo-Pacific in the Indo, which means this gives us cover probably political, economic, social dimension. But the way I understood from given to me, the plan that we on the other part is in the region, and amount have been given, certain numbers have been given to, and they will themselves to in the big first round when they will be speaking for 8 minutes. At this, I think I would confine to three broad in a way set up the of this dialogue. My first that the time session is really it's a very why? Because in the preceding we had in the required meeting in Canada. I think we are familiar with the chief and then reaction that were both participant countries and for countries who were part holding its direct consensus there. So this is a pre-development, and the other also the kind of was the external affairs to the Philippines and members of ASEAN, and their dialogue was taken in a certain of defense political effort. And that also has been noted observers ASEAN. And the third, which makes timely going to happen subsequent coming week, and this is actually the Indo-Pacific Serial Forum, which is being by France, countries present there, 3 countries, and both that would not be there, all special significance to the government, and I can say that our dialogue is sandwiched 2 sets and lands truly is. My second block is essentially that the Indian partnership aspect partnership have to be first of all in the context external and I think context of what happened but past the of the formation of AUKUS, certain actions to these. So the announcement Indo strategy now recently.
Ambassador Bhatia, sir, really sorry for the interruption, but there is some problem with your volume and noise. We cannot actually hear you properly, and we are getting requests from the from the audience that if you could check it once.
Okay.
We can take a few minutes, and you can please check your audio system.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yes, it's better, sir. It's better.
Okay. Sorry about that. So essentially, I was just saying that the external environment is very important, and this is essentially referring to the developments of the past 1 year, when a number of significant trends emerged. I was referring to the consolidation of Quad. I was referring to the formation of AUKUS. I was referring to the announcement of the Indo-Pacific strategies by EU and also by the US. And of course, we all remain focused in understanding the ASEAN's policy and strategy on all these developments. The next defining trend undoubtedly is internal to the India-ASEAN partnership. And there we all know very well that a lot of developments have taken place in the last 2 to 3 years. So I have no doubt that the panelists will also take care of those or factor in those developments and trends as well. So it is in that context, my last or final point would be that the panelists and this particular session is expected very much to undertake a deep analysis, but also make certain suggestions and recommendations, which could eventually be put together, at the end of this whole series, so that those recommendations could go in a proper prepared form to the policy makers. So I'll hope that these points will be undoubtedly borne in mind by the panelists. Thank you very much for your attention. And this is now my privilege to invite Ms. Joan Lin, who has already been introduced, to address all of us. Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Pasha. I'm so glad that we can actually finally hear you towards the end. And yes, I will try to address some of these issues that you have mentioned, like Quad, Indo-Pacific strategies, and the AUKUS. So please allow me to share my presentation slides.
Yes, John, you can please share your presentation.
Yes.
And there's a small request from our side. While you present your slides, please bear the time, and also please try to address a few issues that we have already shared with you, which basically covers the aspects like ASEAN centrality and the recently published US Indo-Pacific strategy. So yeah, that's all. Over to you, John. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sumba. I keep that in mind, and I will try to do my deep analysis and provide recommendations, and all under 10 minutes. So yeah, a very good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First, I thank the ASEAN-India Center for having me here for the very first webinar to celebrate an important milestone, which is the 30th year of ASEAN-India relations. And my congratulations also to India on your 75th year of independence. So today's topic on the evolving strategic architecture in the Indo-Pacific is a very timely one. I mean, this is following the adoption of the ASEAN-India joint statement on cooperation on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific that was actually issued at the ASEAN-India summit last year. So I also like the word evolving, which shows that the Indo-Pacific as a regional concept is really in its very early days. And I think most of us are used to the region also being known as the Asia Pacific, that was prior to the Trump's administration. So as such, the narrative of the Indo-Pacific is very much still being shaped by both ASEAN and the powers that have a vested interest in this region, including India. And we know that the US has just released its new Indo-Pacific strategy, as Dr. Sampa mentioned, that was less than a week ago, emphasizing the importance of ASEAN centrality, so as well as highlighting the significant role of both ASEAN and India. So in today's presentation, the organizer has actually suggested for me to focus on two key areas. One is the importance of ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific, and second is really to look at ASEAN-India relations and what sort of role that these relations can play in the Indo-Pacific. So please allow me to dive right in to talk about why the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, what it is and what it is not. So despite the mixed views within ASEAN on the Indo-Pacific, the ASEAN outlook was adopted in 2019, as also mentioned by the Cambodian ambassador earlier. It was with the aim to help ASEAN navigate the increasingly complex regional architecture amidst major power rivalry. And of course, we are familiar with the competing territorial claims as well. So it is also natural for ASEAN to have this strategy because geographically, it is actually the only region apart from Australia that actually straddles between the Indian and the Pacific Oceans. So, but fundamentally, I think the outlook is really to guide ASEAN in its cooperation with external partners, as well as to safeguard and preserve ASEAN centrality, and that I will talk about soon. So at the same time, I think ASEAN wanted to emphasize the importance of building key principles and norms in the region, and many of which has been mentioned by our excellencies earlier. Such as openness, transparency, inclusivity, respect for international law, good governance, among many others. So while there are also many other Indo-Pacific strategies or initiatives amongst ASEAN dialogue partners, including India, the US Free and Open Indo-Pacific, ASEAN was also quite clear what the AOIP was not meant to be. So it was not meant to counter China's growing influence in Southeast Asia. In fact, ASEAN wanted China to also play a constructive role in the Indo-Pacific. So this is a bit different, from perhaps what the US had in mind. And it was not meant to politicize or securitize the region, which is already a very crowded military space. And third, it was not aimed to create new mechanisms or replace existing ones. So that I will come back. So now let me just briefly talk about this apparent big concept here, which has actually been echoed by all of ASEAN's partners, including India and US. So in fact, ASEAN has been mentioned 19 times in the US Indo-Pacific strategy because the US sees ASEAN as not only central to the regional architecture, but also it wants ASEAN to be empowered and be unified as an organization. So the question that begs to be answered, is what exactly is ASEAN centrality and how ASEAN can give a substantive meaning to it beyond just paying lip services, And what is clear is ASEAN and its partners would like to really see a greater role of ASEAN in the region's development and ASEAN being a driving force in setting the regional agenda. So in 2015, ASEAN actually went into discussion on how ASEAN can enhance its centrality. So 5 dimensions were identified, as you can see on my slide. The first is centrality within ASEAN, and that is upholding values and norms and ensuring that ASEAN maintains its unity and credibility, and that is increasingly important for ASEAN, especially with the Myanmar crisis. And second is centrality vis-a-vis regional flashpoints, such as the South China Sea, Third is centrality vis-a-vis major powers for ASEAN to remain neutral and not taking sides despite certain major power rivalries. And fourth, centrality vis-a-vis the regional architecture by strengthening ASEAN-led mechanisms. And lastly, centrality beyond ASEAN, such as ASEAN having common positions in multilateral fora or promoting ASEAN candidates in international organizations. So these 5 dimensions in a way summarizes what ASEAN centrality is in the Indo-Pacific. So now let me also briefly mention some interesting developments in recent years. And these developments actually is about competing spheres of influence in the region. So this one is actually the strengthening of the quadrilateral security dialogue between Australia, India, Japan, and the US, Quad for short. And the other is the newly formed Australia, UK, US trilateral security arrangement AUKUS, which do have an impact on the regional architecture. And some sees it as a threat, while others perhaps do see some prospect. So let me start with Quad. So ASEAN had once viewed the Quad with some degree of caution due to its potential to undermine ASEAN centrality, as well as the perception of it being to contain China. However, what is interesting to note is the changing perception of the Quad in the region. So I'm quite proud to share with you that we had recently launched the State of Southeast Asia Survey Report, Southeast Asia 2022 Survey Report, just 2 days ago by my institute. So in the report, 58% of the Southeast Asian respondents agree or strongly agree that the strengthening of the Quad and the prospect of tangible cooperation in areas like vaccine security and climate change is positive and reassuring for Southeast Asia. So in a way, we can reason that practical cooperation amongst Quad members is actually quite welcoming for the region at this point in time. And however, AUKUS, on the other hand, has been viewed by many in ASEAN as the US efforts in countering the growing influence of China. So you can actually also see from the survey that more than a third of the Southeast Asian respondents, they feel this way. So in addition, it will also greatly impact the regional defense and security architecture, such as escalating the region's arms race and undermining the nuclear weapons non-proliferation regime. So also with the emergence of this modality centered on the US, the question that ASEAN needs to ask is really, how would these modalities interface with the ASEAN-centered regional mechanisms? And then secondly, would the US-centered modalities like this compete or replace the ASEAN-centered ones? So these are actually some questions, for further thoughts and for further research, and I will be interested to read or, to engage in these discussions. And okay, so just let me end my presentation today, because time is almost up, by highlighting 3 key areas of cooperation that would underline the strength of ASEAN and India relations. I mean, there are, of course, many areas, and over 21 specific activities have been identified by ASEAN and India, which are reflected in that joint statement adopted at the summit last year. But due to time constraint, I'm not going to go into it one by one. So let me just highlight 3. The first is trade, because livelihood is of paramount importance for both regions. So apart from strengthening the ASEAN-India free trade area through trade facilitation, I think ASEAN hopes that India can actually reconsider joining the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, to actually fully reap the economic benefits of the Indo-Pacific region. And of course, at the same time, it's to increase the competitiveness of the Indian economy as well. And second, it's connectivity, ICT infrastructure, and cybersecurity, which was also mentioned in the earlier panel. These are becoming increasingly more important for both India and ASEAN. So I think both sides can boost this aspect through e-commerce, financial technologies, and artificial intelligence, in which India definitely has to strengthen. So on this aspect, I also need to highlight something that's important, that is physical connectivity, such as the India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway that remains very important. And therefore, I think more efforts needs to be undertaken to ensure the progress in the development of such transport projects. And thirdly, in the face of the pandemic, I think public health security remains high on the agenda. So apart from supporting the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, India can also value add by working with ASEAN on vaccines and pharmaceutical research, development and manufacturing of vaccines or medical products to combat the current or even, the future pandemics. And I think ASEAN can also consider to cooperate with India through the Quad vaccine partnership. So lastly, I just want to mention that it's very important, for any cooperation in the Indo-Pacific to be undertaken through existing ASEAN-led mechanisms. So such as the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, and the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, and I'm sure this can be further strengthened. So with that, I thank you and I end my presentation, and I can be back for the Q&A session later. Thank you.
Can't hear you, Ambassador Bhatia. You have to unmute, please.
Thank you for being so self-disciplined and presenting very deep views. In fact, some of them certainly may appear to be quite new to many of us. I was particularly struck by the five-fold definition or elaboration of ASEAN centrality. And of course, essentially all of them are based on the broad assumption that the bigger powers are in a harmonious equation with each other. But if they are not, then how does centrality work? That would be a question that we would need to discuss. I appreciate very much the parameters you drew with regard to the ASEAN-India partnership, and we note that you have once again brought forward the idea that India should consider, or India should reconsider, joining RCEP. There's a message which keeps coming through various channels, and I think we have to very much note that. Thank you very much. Now, I'm happy to request Professor Rajaram Panda to address the audience.
Thank you very much. Is it okay? Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
You are indeed,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, there is some echo is coming at my side. How do I stop it?
Sir,
Are
I
you
think
using
I
two
think you are
devices?
using, yeah, you are logged in from two devices, sir.
The start. Shall I click the start video?
Yes, sir.
I think there is no echo now. You can start.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. No, I think echo is coming at my whatever I'm thinking, it is coming back to me.
Yes, there is an echo, sir.
How do I stop? The start video. Let me click and see. Another application is using your camera. How do I switch to another camera? Wait a minute. I will take help of my grandson. Just give me some time.
So, Ambassador Bhatia, may I request then maybe
Yes.
go to
All
the
right.
next.
I think
then
we can move
come
on
back
to
to
the
him. Yeah.
next speaker, and we'll come back to Professor Panda. Is that okay? Thank you. So let us go to.
Is it okay now? No, the echo is coming back to me. How do I see whatever I'm speaking is coming back to me? This first time I experienced this. You are mute.
I think let us go to Mr. Wafa Karisma. That will give some more time to Professor Panda. So,
But
Mr.
how we
Karisma
resolve this, I'm
from
not able to
Indonesia, may I request you to address the audience now at this stage?
That would be fine, Ambassador. Would that be okay with Professor Panda? Professor Panda? Okay then. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you. Perfect. Again, thank you, Ambassador Bhatia, for moderating this session. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Sachin Saturverdi of the RIS, also Dr. Prabir Dey and Dr. Sampakundi of the AIC. In RIS for inviting us in CSIS to talk in this prestigious event. Again, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to represent CSIS Indonesia. It's a pleasure to be here in the presence of distinguished persons, shall I say, frontiers of ASEAN-India relations. And having been in a think tank based in Jakarta, I've had the experience in taking part of research, advocacy, structural activities surrounding ASEAN. And for Indonesia, again, ASEAN remains the key mechanism for the bulk of its foreign policy. So we've worked quite a lot with ASEAN. And again, I would like to take my time today to address the narrative, the convergences, divergences, opportunities, and challenges around the India-ASEAN strategic relations. I was set the tone as well. I think from Dr. Joanna Lin has set the tone well for the discussion. I was also asked to lay a discussion on the Australia-India trilateral, the possibility of this trilateral to take off in the Indo-Pacific. But in short, my argument is this. ASEAN and India is in a promising trajectory. We have solid foundation with the documents of, especially in the last 5 years at least. And we can agree that there is a plenty of room to deepen cooperation because as partners, we don't have a lot of problems with each other. While that indicates something positive, it also indicates that there's plenty of room to work with, right? We have not exhausted our options in the relationship because it is built gradually. And again, in a similar tone with ideas in unilateral ideas such as India, Australia, Indonesia trilateral, the convergences are there, especially very obviously in the maritime domain. But key to this is both relations, ASEAN-India and also India-Australia-Indonesia trilateral. The key is to move beyond, I think, rhetoric support to something like resource allocations and plans. So more on that. And this might need patience and consistency starting from the top down, from diplomatic initiatives, from visits, but while also working with task-oriented in shared issues on the ground. So a two-pronged way. It also depends also on the long-term outlook for each countries for the relations to take off, for them to adopt a more long-term outlook, looking beyond current different leaning and propensity to alignments such as AUKUS and preference in the regional balance of power, which could make, of course, countries in ASEAN tend to be quite hesitant with that kind of with the different alignments and different leanings. But again, just to get back on the settings. But in the context of ASEAN and India, of course, the convergence is in finding that similarities that converges between India's vision of the Indo-Pacific and ASEAN's own, the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And the setting is very well known. Both visions address something specific when it comes to its strategic relations. That is to navigate the U.S.-China strategic competition. And the general argument is based on a past research in CSIS that we see that India's strategic interest is placed on safeguarding and maximizing the potential of its regional maritime domain, especially noting the importance of its sea routes, trade, because of its importance for trade and for overall of the India's economic growth. And this for ASEAN has provided the opportunity because India has strived to improve relations with countries in ASEAN, especially the littoral states of Indian Ocean. So there's a convergence there. We're looking at each other technically in the geopolitical setting. So that's the setting. But there's, of course, from the observer's point of view, there is always there is a diverging points as well, because ASEAN's visions of the Indo-Pacific tend to, I think, avoid or bypass things like great power competition. We tend to try to mitigate the risk of the excess of great power competition to pull that energy, that extra energy into multilateral forums, into cooperative projects. That's the idea in ASEAN. That's the idea of working as a small middle power, as a grouping, to preserve our strategic autonomy. And rather differently, at least in the views of observers and analysts, India's vision have its own leaning because India has a different geopolitical setting than most ASEAN countries in that it's more target. It has a more specific target of the threats it wants to address. While ASEAN tend to avoid India, for example, it has more obvious, geopolitical consideration. Like we may read it about the China factor in their strategic calculation, the concern with Pakistan, with possible encroachment in sea and land. That comes a bit more clearly from India's vision, from the ASEAN perspective. But from ASEAN, usually we tend to avoid that, and we tend to really emphasize on the cooperative projects, on that small little projects, and to take that energy of competition into our mechanisms. But again, talking about convergences, both India and ASEAN are two parties that is benefiting from the peace dividend and therefore strives to maintain our own strategic autonomy. We also don't like any hegemonic dominance in the region. We both prefer a much more multipolar regional structure to sustain independence. We also value openness, inclusivity, and international law. And both see competition between countries as something to not deter countries from together addressing common issues, such as emphasized by our Indo-Pacific visions. And just like India, key countries in ASEAN have embarked in improving its maritime sector. Like India, countries like Indonesia have paid particular importance to the building of port infrastructures, boosting productivity in its maritime sector, and safeguarding its marine resources. So these are some of the more obvious selling point of cooperation. And both sides have a shared area of interest. The more obvious one is the Malacca Strait and the South China Sea, which is the primary route between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And they both share concerns in disturbance to that route, to the trade, to the access of trade, such as piracy, maritime terrorism, and smuggling. And another important convergence is that both emphasize ASEAN centrality, as what my colleague has emphasized previously. But the challenges is, in terms of relationship, as we continue to gradually progress, usually from observers' point of view, there is an issue of resource constraint in foreign affairs offices, especially in Indonesia and ASEAN. When it comes to the call to step up, they would like to take their time and not seek on another, because India is involved in a lot of settings, involved in a lot of grouping. So is Indonesia. So there is an issue of resource stretch. And of course, another issue as well, as mentioned by Dr. Joanna Lin, is that AOIP still lacks its implementation strategy, right? At the moment, AOIP appears to be more of an inward-looking outlook rather than an instrument to outwardly shape the region. You can see that it's based on normative principles and a long list of potential areas, just to list that. So it lacks a plan of action, a lack of an actionable strategy as of now. So the situation is that India is waiting for concrete plans from ASEAN, while ASEAN is also, on the contrary, is also waiting for more of India's contribution and participation to ASEAN-led processes. That's usually the common observation. But there's plenty of opportunities as laid out by our ambassadors earlier on. There's plenty of strong bilateral foundations, for instance, between India and some ASEAN countries such as Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam. There is plenty of infrastructure projects that involve India and several ASEAN countries like BIMSTEC and Mekong Ganga Cooperation. There is plenty of mentioning of AOIP, especially in 2019, from senior officials of India. So that indicates a heightened interest. And there is an eagerness, I think, from the Indian side as well, to be the preferred partner, to be the benign power in the region for security partnership for Southeast Asian countries. We see that there is a trend that we might in the future, ASEAN countries purchase more of Indian arms, purchase more of technologies from India. So that could be a room as well, to go forward. That's the opportunities, going forward. So in terms of, in short, we are heading in a very promising direction in terms of ASEAN and India. But the key is to push so that collaboration can move beyond the documents into probably specific projects, specific acts, specific plans. That's the challenge for us. And I think for most of other for most Southeast Asian countries, there is always a room to work for a benign power, because there's not a lot of options currently to deepen cooperation. And maritime security is an obvious selling point. India's involvement in initiative like RECAP, or its joint declaration on to combat international terrorism. Those are models, and excellent models that we can jump in, and things like disaster management as well, maritime piracy, international crime. Those are the areas that looks very promising in terms of ASEAN and India relations. Again, similarly with, I think I was asked to address as well the possibility of the Indonesia, Australia, India maritime partnership to take off. Again, similarly, these are three democracies, three countries who paid more attention to maritime domain. All three has been turning to maritime domain, and all three emphasize rule-based maritime order and other challenges in the region from technology, energy, connectivity. And so again, maritime domain is the most obvious selling point. For instance, Navy for India, for Australia, for Indonesia have been a consistent actor in the three bilateral relationships. So based on a past research between CSIS, ORF, and Lowy Institute, we have identified activities such as naval activities such as visits, training, capacity building with field personnel, tabletop exercises between maritime law enforcement, workshops on maritime domain, awareness and familiarity with UNCLOS. Those are some of the things that we can work on the short term. While on the medium term, these collaborations can cooperate on joint efforts such as on sustainable use of ocean resources, disaster relief, search and rescue, maritime safety and security issues, a bit more directly with a bit more practical cooperations. Right. On a side note, ASEAN has been active in exploring options for ocean sustainability. Right. The major effort, ASEAN has been pursuing major effort with for us ocean sustainability, with key document like the East Asia Summit Leaders Statement on Marine Sustainability adopted in November 2020. And so the option, for example, to work with is that India can work with ASEAN, with Indonesia, with countries in the region on ocean sustainability, particularly in sustainable responsible fisheries, in promotion of conservations, in joint researches that is worked under ASEAN-led mechanisms. That would be the way forward. I think I can end my presentation there, and we can leave more for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear friend, you have made a number of important observations. They are subtle and they are interlinked, and they are showing not merely the ASEAN perspective, but also an ASEAN perspective with an Indonesian tinge. I was particularly struck by your essential point that ASEAN tends to look everything still in the cooperative prism, whereas India, surrounded by various kinds of national security threats from the countries that you mentioned, has a tendency to be much more cautious and vigilant. And then you have gone on to talk about the maritime issues, and we will have a chance to quickly catch up on that. Let me thank you and quickly check if Professor Rajaram Panda can address us. May I invite you, sir, to take the floor?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Same problem is still there. Shall I continue like this?
We are not hearing the echo, so you kindly continue, persist with it. I think that is the best thing to do.
The echo is coming back to me, but if you are able to hear whatever I am going to speak, I think I'll continue.
We are okay. We are okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Bhatia. And also in the beginning, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Professor Prabir today, and Sampa also has been after me. And I will, she has given me only 10 minutes, but I will try to summarize and make some bullet points on 4 or 5 key issues, even at the risk of overlapping of some of the issues which are already addressed. Now, the first one, what are the potentials of defense and security cooperation between ASEAN and India? And as a political security construct, what are ASEAN's challenges and opportunities? And how can India going to support ASEAN in those endeavors? Now, in this, my core analysis of my presentation is from which sector actually the perceived or visibly seen threats are coming, and the first immediate idea that occurs to me is from a single country, that is China. Now, so far as China is concerned, there are so many regional forums where this issue is being discussed often, but also at the same time there has been some reluctance to one now it is okay. Somebody on mute. Oh,
Is there a problem?
I think I don't know, because I got a message to on mute, which I did.
No,
Sir, we can hear you. Can please continue.
Shall I continue?
Yes, yes.
Please.
Okay. Now I was just mentioning about China as a kind of bully for most of the nations in the region. So the biggest challenge is how to deal with the China challenge, as we put it. Now, from which areas these challenges are coming from China? The specific issues or topics are for discussion could be China, of course, as a whole, as an institution, as a regional organizations. Myanmar is another issue where I should not speak more, because Professor Bhatia is there; he's an expert on that. Cambodia also. The idea is that China is trying to influence the policy decisions of some of these countries. Then how we actually react and what kind of responses are required. So in this, the South China Sea area, India's, not only India's, many of the East Asian countries are very much associated, involved, so long as the maritime traffic is concerned. Trillions of dollars of cargo pass through the South China Sea, and China has been slowly and incrementally expanding its footprint and also control, ignoring the legitimate claims of some of the ASEAN member countries who also have similar kind of claims in their exclusive economic zones. Now, all of us know that in 2016, the Philippines had gone to the Hague Court and got a verdict in its favor, but that court did not have law enforcing authority. Now, in the meantime, President of Philippines tried to reach out to China, but later on, within 2 years, realized that the policy is his policy towards China is flawed, and now it is again trying to go back to
Professor Panda, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry for the interruption. Sir, since we are discussing about India and ASEAN, we were expecting to discuss about, the political security communities that ASEAN have been working on, and how India can expect or how India can, contribute towards ASEAN. I'm extremely sorry for the interruption, but if we can come back to that discussion, it would be really.
I am coming to that. I'm just coming to that.
Sir.
In fact,
Okay, sir.
I was just going to mention about how it is relevant to increase and strengthen the defense capabilities of Asian countries, and to what extent India can contribute. Now, in that context, the recent defense sale agreement, India's the Brahmo missiles, which is reputed to be the world's fastest cruise missiles, and India has already entered into an agreement, and the Philippines has already going to receive 375 million deal. This is the first foreign country to which India is going to export this. And also similar kind of talks had been going on for quite some time with Vietnam, but going to probably cost factor or some other considerations, the talks did not make much progress. Now, if this is going to be successful, I think India has the ASEAN member countries have their own aspirations from India, because India is seen as an emerging regional power. So the ultimate objective and goal is to secure peace, security in the region. And here, maybe talks have been made about Quad and also AUKUS, but given the close cooperation between India and Japan, and also their involvement or maybe the similar kind of stake in Myanmar, and their main joint cooperation to develop India's Northeast. I think the issue of connectivity and also other ways to help the ASEAN member countries could be a very good viable way of dealing with. I mean, India dealing with the ASEAN in member countries. No, so then the other point that I'm trying to touch is the Quad. There have been talks that why Quad is limited to 4. In the beginning, Quad actually, it has been claiming that it is not a security organization. Actually, it is not, since it embraced also other issues. But if there have been summit meetings of the leaders of the 4 countries, and also foreign ministers of the four Quad member countries are meeting, I think it is time to even think seriously whether a similar kind of an annual meetings of defense ministers can be explored. And also, the other related issue is Quad. Should it remain confined to only 4 member nations, or it should be expanded? Given the relevance of Quad as a motivator to secure peace and stability in the region, there are potential candidates such as Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, South Korea, and even the non-Asian countries like France, who have been taking interest in the Indo-Pacific region. I think this possibility also should be explored. Now, if I can elaborate a bit more about the why the Brahmo missiles, India's export of the Brahmo missiles is a kind of trendsetter from India's point of view to strengthen the defense capabilities of the individual ASEAN nations, so that they can cope with the China challenge. Because China, so long as China remains as the elephant in the room, no single individual ASEAN member nations will be able to face China. But then collectively, if they come to some policy decisions and they try to deal, probably India's health will be more important.
Could you please conclude in about 2 minutes, Professor Panda?
Yes. The last point that I'm going to say is regarding the U.S. policy towards the Indo-Pacific. Now, on 11th February, the White House released its official Indo-Pacific strategy document. The document is the first regional strategy that the Biden administration has released, which cites the mounting challenges posed by the rise of China as a key driver of the intensifying American focus on the Indo-Pacific. I think we should all go, with that policy document. It further says our objective is not to change China, but to save the strategic environment in which it operates. The strategy strongly emphasizes working together with US allies and partners in the region, especially the Quad. That is where I think our thrust should lie. And on the security and strategic areas, India should be able to contribute towards consolidating and further deepening our relations with the ASEAN region as a whole. I think I will end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Panda, for your intervention. One can see very clearly that you have given considerable importance to the China threat, and from that point of view, you have a certain number of suggestions. We'll come to discussing that as soon as we get to that point. Thank you. May I now invite Dr. Lawrence Prabhakar Williams to address the audience, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Bhatia. Thank you, Professor Pradeep Dey, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, and Dr. Sampha Kundu for this opportunity to speak in this webinar. Let me present the perspective today, premising the India-ASEAN security relations in the emerging strategic architecture of the Indo-Pacific. At the outset, let me thank the Lord God for giving me this opportunity to speak in this webinar. India's Look East policy and later Act East policy was to engage Southeast Asia's robust economies, and it was to seek security cooperation and convergence to address its security concerns. India and the ASEAN have primarily been engaged both in border security as well as maritime security in the way that India had approached ASEAN both in terms of its land connectivity and maritime connectivity. One of the primary catalysts of the expanded India's-ASEAN security convergence and cooperation has been India's own involvement in the region of its historical civilization ties, and also in the contemporary sense, China's growing influence in the region. India and ASEAN have promoted long-term cooperative partnership in various aspects of security cooperation so that a stable, peaceful region could emerge into that. Given the region's increasing security turbulence resulting from major power competition, territorial disputes, non-traditional security threats, there is an imperative between ASEAN and India in areas of comprehensive security cooperation and dialogue to be intensified. At the strategic and policy levels, India and ASEAN have reached a level of mutual understanding, and there is a need to combat international terrorism, transnational crimes, enhance what is called as cyber security, and also health security issues has come in recent times. The unity and centrality of ASEAN and its ties with India is the major hallmark of India's Act East engagement, as well as its enduring economic, commercial, and trade ties that India and ASEAN have come to be with each other. This coming year, 2022, marks the 30 years of relationship between India and ASEAN since 1992, in which India has engaged ASEAN there. One of India's central premise of engaging ASEAN in the emerging strategic architecture of the Indo-Pacific is the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. And what India has done is that it has transformed its Act East policy into a refined act by which the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative has been marshaled into what we could call a constructive engagement with ASEAN. Indo-ASEAN relations today feature more than 30 platforms for dialogues and includes annual summits and 7 minister-level dialogues. So what are these seminal strategic issues between India and ASEAN in the context of the Indo-Pacific? And what would be the impact of the new initiatives of India's Act East policy in the event of the 30 years of Indo-ASEAN relations will be the focus of my presentation. When we look into the new salience of the strategic architecture in the Indo-Pacific, we find the aggressive rise of China, the ratcheting of tensions in the region. Yet, ASEAN has harped on peaceful actions of diplomacy and the subscription to the Chinese RCEP. ASEAN has been more focused on its centrality issue than any other factor, and India has also been focused on its converging aspects of the Indo-Pacific, namely the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. India has well accounted for the ASEAN centrality as it has been promoting its IPOI, and India has been promoting SAGAR as a paradigm of its version for the region there, security and growth for all in the region. India and ASEAN have been exploring into the open, inclusive, rules-based regional architecture, the common medium in which we find both in the ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific as well as in the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. While the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific focuses on maritime cooperation, connectivity, sustainable development goals, and economic cooperation, the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative focuses on the 7 strategic pillars of what it calls expanding connectivity and infrastructure development in the region. India walked out of the RCEP in November 2019 for its own reasons, while ASEAN adopted it. India has been more focused about its own self-reliant Atmanirbhar projects, and therefore India had to take that decision there. India, on the other hand, has promoted SAGAR and IPOA as expanding diplomatic instruments in the region there. India's convergence and its desire to increase its defense presence in the region has been one of the major reasons of the Indo-ASEAN security dialogue. The focal point has been India's defense approach in the Southeast Asian region, particularly in terms of maritime security capabilities that it is expanding in the region there. Geographically, ASEAN appears to be pivotal to India's security, given its geographical positioning around critical points of Straits of Malacca, linked to the Indian Ocean as well as the Western Pacific. India has been expanding its presence, particularly maritime presence and interest in expanded security diplomacy with ASEAN states. India participates in a series of consultative meetings with ASEAN that includes the ASEAN Regional Forum, the Post-Ministerial Conference 10+1, the Shangri-La Dialogue, and the East Asia Summit. India has bilateral dialogues at the defense level with Singapore, with Vietnam, with Indonesia, with Malaysia, with Thailand. India's focus on maritime security has definitely rebounded to boost India-ASEAN security ties. India has various compatible interests with ASEAN states, especially in the freedom of navigation, tackling non-traditional issues of piracy and terrorism. It has signed the Joint Declaration of Cooperation to Combat International Terrorism. It has also committed to enhance greater security cooperation through traditional security issues, while also it is trying to enhance maritime cooperation through ASEAN Maritime Forum from issues ranging from piracy to freedom of navigation. India has acceded to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in its qualified support to the Southeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone. India's engagement with ARF has been contributed to its image as a benign military power. India looks beyond the ASEAN-led architecture to consolidate its sphere of influence in the region through its own instruments of the IORA and the IONS. India is building on maritime multilateralism with Southeast Asia, and all the elements of benign scope of building maritime security in the region has been enhanced. India has also been constructively involved in the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, ADMM+, and that is an institutional initiative of India's security interests in the region there. Another aspect of India's engagement has been India's defense diplomacy in the region since 1990s. And India's defense diplomacy covers a broad range of activities like the Ministry of Defense training courses and broad education programs. It includes military education and training opportunities for the overseas military officers. naval warships on port calls, deployment of military aircraft and other military units in humanitarian disaster relief measures and constellation missions has always been Indian Navy's primary focus. There has always been the regular routine staff level talks, conferences, seminars, and that has been made to improve understanding and exercises that enhance cooperation and interoperability. In specific bilateral cases, the India-Singapore naval exercise, the India-Thai naval exercise, the India-Vietnam naval exercise have been very important flagship events that has been happening in the region. And India has also been a part of the coordinated patrol in the Andaman Sea there. India has been a major source of military training, which is called as the Indian Technical Economic Cooperation, to many of the ASEAN states. And India's defense agreements with Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines have broadened the scope of future defense cooperation. Notably, the recent sale of the BrahMos missiles to Philippines is one way by which India has engaged in extensive defense sales diplomacy. India has also been involved in by its maritime doctrine of 2009 and 2015, in which it has built its naval diplomacy of the use of naval forces to build friendships, bridges of friendship, and also strengthen international cooperation there. India's naval diplomacy has resulted in the initiation of IONs that has featured Malaysia, Thailand, Myanmar as participating members. PLAN is another Indian initiative in which ASEAN countries are involved. And similarly, RECAP is also another initiative into which India is also involved. Similarly, the Western Pacific Naval Symposium provides another forum for India to engage Southeast Asian navies in the region there. However, the South China Sea remains to be a critical maritime threat as a theater as for a threat in which India finds contending Chinese influences in the region there. And given the nature and the scope of the prevalent instability in the South China Sea, in which both ASEAN states and India are facing, India has been advocating for a free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific, which includes South China Sea as a vital premier area of engagement. India's interests and stakes has not only been in the ancient historical period, but more so in the contemporary period. To look into how India's Act East policy has worked, in 2015, India and Vietnam signed a bilateral defense and Coast Guard cooperation agreement. India and Vietnam signed various bilateral agreements in 2016.
Prabhakar, please, can you conclude in about 2 minutes?
Yes, I'll do that. And we find that these are some of the initiatives that India has been done into it. Let me finally focus on India's role and partnership in the ASEAN in terms of the IPOI. India's promotion of the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative has been a vigorous engagement along with the Quad, and ASEAN can serve as a fulcrum into which India and the other extra-regional partners can serve into it. The 14th ASEAN Summit of 2019 June saw the introduction of the ASEAN Outlook of the Indo-Pacific, and this merges with very much of the India's Indian Oceans in the initiative of the 14th East Asia Summit in Bangkok in November 2019 there. So we find that the India-ASEAN Plan of Action of 2021 to 2025 synergizes very well with the strategic framework of India's IPOI. And finally, what I would like to conclude is basically that there is an India-ASEAN convergence in terms of connectivity, sustainable development, and maritime security. And India and ASEAN have a distinct understanding of the Indo-Pacific that has to be bridged in terms of the common areas. Thirdly, the Indian IPOI and the ASEAN Outlook of the Indo-Pacific have the various areas of convergences which could be worked on. And the plan of action of India and ASEAN of 2021 to 25 envisages for a broader and extensive cooperation between the two sides. That includes UNCLOS, that includes uninterrupted trade and commerce and resolution of outstanding maritime disputes. And finally, we find that though the primary focus of India-ASEAN ties have been economic cooperation, we find that the security dialogue has been much fruitful between the two countries. Particularly India's IPOI will set the stage into which we find that India will be able to better dialogue with ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific. We stop at this point. I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you very much for a very solid and substantive intervention. Appreciate your overarching approach and particular focus on IPOI. Dear friends, at this stage, in interest of time, what I'm going to do is, we have roughly about 25 minutes. I'm going to put a couple of questions to the panelists first. I've had a look at the chat box. I've got some sort of synthetic ideas, or I'll do that, and then I'll come to Sampa, who can pick up specific questions from the chat box to supplement the first part of the discussion. We have two, not three, scholars from the region, and I think we have to make full use, especially because they come from very prestigious institutions. So my first question is to Joan, who's sitting in Singapore, has a very special perspective on the region's developments. The central question that is engaging Indian scholars and even perhaps Indian authorities is that ASEAN continues to follow the policy of centrality and the political values and strategic approaches of the past, when actually the Indo-Pacific region has undergone a major transformation. The centrality of ASEAN made a lot of sense when US and China were working together in a cooperative manner. Today, they are coming to be at loggerheads. And as a result, US and its partners are on one side, and China and perhaps other countries on the other side. So frankly, the question from Indian side is, John, when is ASEAN going to update its perspective? Or does ASEAN has indefinite patience and hope for cooperation? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Did you mean that what is, sorry, I didn't catch the last part of your question. You asked whether ASEAN is going to update, you mean update
What I'm
our
saying is
concept of
that the
centrality?
major power relationships have changed in the past 3-4 years,
Yes,
particularly from the last year of Trump administration.
yeah,
US-China contestation has become sharper and deeper. But
exactly.
ASEAN continues to simply hope and be patient for cooperation between the two, on which is based the concept of ASEAN centrality. But if the base is gone, how is ASEAN still standing on something for which the feet are gone?
Yes,
When are you going
exactly.
to be more contemporary?
Exactly. I think that's a very good question. I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, the regional architecture is evolving, and there's even more competition, within the region at this point in time. And that is exactly the very reason why ASEAN came up with the AOIP, the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, is precisely because of all these rising regional challenges and even the major power competition, as you mentioned, between India and China. And I think this makes ASEAN centrality even more important because, as I mentioned earlier, one of the dimensions is ASEAN centrality vis-a-vis major power competition. And I think it is very important for ASEAN not to take sides. And I know that there are various bilateral relations between various ASEAN member states and the various powers in the region, especially certain are more prone towards aligning themselves with China, while some are to the US. But I think ASEAN as a bloc is very important to maintain that sort of neutrality. And that sort of neutrality is part of the concept of ASEAN centrality. But of course, there are still a lot of issues within ASEAN that ASEAN is still unable to have a major say in this world, is because there's actually a lack of unity. There's actually a lack of cohesiveness within the bloc. And I think this is something that ASEAN has to work more on. It's really about building its own internal centrality before it can project its centrality into the region or into the Indo-Pacific region. And I also saw a very interesting question on the Myanmar crisis. So as you can see that, that in fact, if you read the State of Southeast Asia survey that number of respondents, quite a high number of respondents are actually quite disappointed in ASEAN because we did not deliver on many fronts. And one of the fronts is, of course, Myanmar, and of course, South China Sea, the code of conduct has been very long in the making. So these are issues that we battle with within ASEAN. And if there is really something that we need to do more, or something that ASEAN has to consider more, is how do we build that sort of cohesiveness? How do we build that sort of credibility within the region? So I think this is where we need to go towards.
Thank you very much. I would only comment that while quite expectedly you remain very deeply attached to the concept of ASEAN centrality, and honestly, at the level of the government here, there is also complete dedication to the idea of ASEAN centrality. But I think in the academic and strategic circles in India, misgivings have been rising. I think that is a point you need to note. Let me go to my Indonesian friend very quickly and ask him about the maritime domain on which he kept coming back again and again. And I really asked him about what the two other panelists were highlighting, particularly Lawrence. And this is the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative of India, which represents the new face of India's Act East policy. Now, as you know, there are 7 sectors there. India has managed to get a few partners who would be the lead countries for those sectors. What should, and this is my question, what should India do in order to make ASEAN more drawn towards this initiative? This is for Mr. Charisma.
Thank you, Ambassador. So we're talking about the IPOI, right? I think the law is to, not the law. I mean, the norm is to make ASEAN more attracted to an initiative. At this point, it needs to be aligned with ASEAN's own plans. It needs to be aligned with ASEAN's own outlook. And for example, because the IPOI also contains, for example, a sector on connectivity, right? So it needs to be aligned with the impact, the regional connectivity plan from ASEAN. So this, I think this is one of the key areas that should be assured first to make sure that there is interest from the ASEAN side. And another thing would be I think to be obvious would be resources, I think, because ASEAN usually its relations with dialogue partners usually what we need from our dialogue partners are usually assurances of resources, assurances of ideas, because ASEAN can be divided as well in these plans, in terms of connectivity plans, in terms of plans about maritime. We were even divided, for example, in addressing issues like IU fishing or domestic issues like that. So we're still divided, and we usually go to our dialogue partner to push for a bit more unity, because usually when there's a lead from the dialogue partner, there's usually it acts as a force of unity for ASEAN itself, because there is a practical invitation from a dialogue partner. Usually ASEAN becomes have an easier time to agree with them. And actually that's also a problem relating to the first question with regards to ASEAN centrality. The problem with ASEAN centrality is that ASEAN is becoming less relevant and more looks more disunited with one another. That's why the attraction to ASEAN centrality also lowers. So usually the relationship with dialogue partners is that what we can work with India, for instance, is to act as that force of unity for ASEAN. And that's usually the problem with ASEAN, because the unity doesn't come from among itself in some of the more sensitive or even some of the more trouble troubling cases, it usually comes from others. It usually comes from dialogue partner.
Thank you. I think what you have just said is something I'm sure your colleague from Singapore is noting down, and we'll have to either agree or disagree, but the message is coming home to the Indian audience. Dear friends, let me quickly pick up a very good question which has been asked by a researcher from Cambodia, Him Raksme. And there's a question to the Indian panelists, and I'm going to request both the panelists to speak, but briefly. And his question is very pertinent. What do India expect ASEAN to do and not to do in the Indo-Pacific? So in the interest of, our rapporteurs getting it right, Rajaramji, first you kindly go and tell us one thing you want ASEAN to do and one thing you want ASEAN not to do.
I think the biggest challenge from my perspective, if I look at the ASEAN as an organization, ASEAN, when we talk about ASEAN centrality, we need to also keep it in mind there is plenty of gaps within the ASEAN, like in terms of uneven economic development, in different forms of government. So to keep all the 10 members together is itself a problem for the ASEAN. Now, from India's point of view, what India should try to impress upon the ASEAN is should be based on the larger goal to look at the external threats coming from any other side, and that should be the driving force to keep the institution, the organization together. So this is some problem, some issue, if not a problem, which the ASEAN member states need to address themselves first. And India is always we are always willing partner with the ASEAN in all kinds of all spheres of activities, like economic spheres, maritime sphere, defense cooperation, people to people contact, because we have civilizational linkages with the entire Southeast Asia. It is not recent. We have centuries of relationship, so that also should come as help.
Okay.
I think that is how I would like to put it.
Thank you. Thank you. Lawrence Prabhakar, what would be your answer? One thing that you want ASEAN to do and one thing you want ASEAN to avoid.
I think ASEAN should basically look into India and reconnect civilization connectivity. That will be something in which the India-ASEAN ties will go forward, and thereby we can have many of the pillars of the IPOI being translated effectively. And ASEAN not to do is basically not to overly support China in the whole extent, because that basically will have further ruffled up within India as well as the Quad, complicating the relations. That's what that's my plain answer.
Thank you very much. I think this is very straightforward, and I'm sure rapporteurs are getting happy. One more question to John, and then I'm going to Dr. Sampa. John, my question to you is, we know consistently every time a Singaporean scholar addresses Indian audience or international audience, he or she always says that India not signing RCEP was a big disappointment. And you have not disappointed because you said yourself that India should reconsider signing RCEP. Now, my question is that if India sticks to its line and is unable to reconsider, do you feel that India-ASEAN economic relationship can be protected and expanded through the existing trade arrangements that we already have between India and ASEAN?
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, I mean, that's right. I mean, whenever Singaporean speaks, we speak about RCEP. I'm actually a political security researcher. I have another colleague who is even more passionate about this from the economic side. But yes, I think that without India being in RCEP, and I know that the US is not in RCEP as well, but there are dialogue partners that are not in RCEP, and there are things that we can do together and things that we can do together well. And I think I also mentioned earlier that, you know, you don't need to be in RCEP for us to strengthen things like the ICT infrastructure, connectivity, and even e-commerce. I think, you know, digital development within ASEAN is really a sphere that we are looking at, and that is exactly where India has strength. But of course, you know, the RCEP being a third of the world's population, and you know, it's definitely an instrument that, you know, ASEAN is actually using to demonstrate, you know, to the world that we are actually stepping up effort towards a post-pandemic economic recovery. And, you know, it's really an instrument that actually will attract more investment to the region. So we feel that, you know, India can also benefit, you know, in that as well, you see. I mean, because this is really the highest quality agreement that we have in the region, and it's an agreement that actually surpasses, you know, some of the ASEAN +1 FTAs, you know, with really a common rule of origin that is really applied throughout the whole RCEP region, and that's about 30% of the world. And there are also other clauses within RCEP that India can actually benefit from it. And I recall some speaker talking about the MSMEs, because RCEP has provisions to boost MSMEs capacity, and India has got a large number of MSMEs. So this is where, you know, and of course there are several other provisions as well, like IP protection, that sort of things that, you know, we feel that, you know, we can all benefit in it together. Yeah, that's for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the message that we need to take home is that India's decision was not sentimental or emotional. It was a very studied decision. And I think scholars in India are watching the alarm bells which are ringing for RCEP. The Philippines has delayed ratification. Australia-China relationship is what the whole world knows today. And India consciously walked out of RCEP at the last minute. Therefore, when we cannot get plan A for all of us, we should look at plan B. And I think that is something that I request you to tell your economic specialists in ICs. At this stage, dear friend, I know that Sampa has been watching even more closely the chat box, and may I request her to put one or two questions on issues which we have not been able to discover so far. Over to you, Sampa.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Yes, we are running actually short of time, and I can see there are many questions in the chat box, but due to the time constraint, we won't be able to take all of it. I would like to take one question, and I think again our friends from ASEAN, they have to answer to this question if they wish to. So the question is from Professor Nomesh Golia, and he is actually asking about you know what we can see in the field of academic cooperation, educational cooperation. So he is asking that in the long term, specifically for DIA program, can some ASEAN youth look at India for their technological research? So what are the ways and what are your recommendations towards it? If Joan or Wafa, if any one of you can answer to this question, please.
Can I pass it to Wafa first?
Well, I'm not too privy about what is the current trend in the education sector, but clearly we are watching you know, India rising up. You know, some of the best leaders in the world are Indians, of course, and a lot of my teachers are educated because I studied in international relations, are educated in with PhD in India. So India is there. India is definitely you know, is there. But in terms of, I think, technological sector, what can be done is to think what sectors can be complementary to the current ASEAN needs. For example, the most obvious need for ASEAN is on infrastructure, right? Connectivity. So technology to, or even, capacity, in that education sector, in technical capacity to build ports, to build infrastructure, a sustainable infrastructure. That would be one case where I think exchanges, joint researches, or even studies, and exchanges can take place. And I think the key point is to just look at these the more that these lights, these sectors that is quite obvious that the region needs. I think that's where I can go with this.
Well, thank you, Wafa. I will take one more question, and this question is from a student from Delhi University, if I'm not wrong. Her question is rather a lengthy question, so I will just take one line from the question. And again, if any one of you could throw some light on the dilemma between geoeconomics and geopolitics. Specifically, if you think that geoeconomics is overtaking geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific, maybe any one of you can just throw some light on this in one or two lines, and then we'll come to the end of the session. Or maybe Ambassador Bhatia can throw some light on this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this essentially means that we had no choice but to synthesize several questions, and we were able to get some good insights today. It is now left to me to once again, I think, essentially point out that this dialogue has been useful, mainly because we are beginning to feel comfortable with each other by talking candidly. I think the Indian side would have noted that ASEAN plans to be still cooperative, courteous, and patient with its largest neighbor in the region. And the ASEAN side undoubtedly has noted that the degree of patience, cooperation, and courtesy on the Indian side certainly have been going down. So there is a disconnection that we need to overcome by talking in greater depth and perhaps in a closed door format to better understand each other's concerns and perspectives. My second point that comes out very clearly is that, when we talk about strategic, in a way, economy is also strategic. And therefore, while India is recognizing how strongly ASEAN feels about ourselves, in order to make sure that this is not the dialogue of the deaf, it's important that both sides now begin to talk of plan B. I think it's very important because in the process, our existing comprehensive India-ASEAN economic arrangements, how to improve them and expand them and deepen them is an option that I think both sides very much should need to look at. Third, I think on the maritime space, we spent a lot of time trying to understand where the convergences are, and there are many involving Australia, involving Japan, certainly seeing how best we can work together with the US and other countries. So probably a deeper discussion on the maritime space would be required. And finally, I think we focused very much on Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, and we saw how strongly the Indian side is attached to it for good reasons. And we received some good suggestions from the ASEAN side that there is a need to sell it better. There is a need to convince ASEAN that it is not running contrary to ASEAN's own master plan for connectivity, for example, and there can be better alignment between the two. So more dialogue is required there too, because frankly, without the involvement of ASEAN's business community and academic community, uh, it's somewhat difficult for Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative to make progress. There have been many more items which I'm sure have been noted by the panelists and by the rapporteurs. I simply wish to say in the end that every panelist gave his or her best. It helped us to deepen our insights, our own understanding and knowledge of these very complex matters. And this was all being done within the parameters of an open dialogue. But clearly, I think we have to thank uh, the RIS and AIC for their creativity in terms of creating this platform. And I hope we will be able to build upon it in future. Thank you very much, all the panelists. And thank you, Sachin and Prabir, for this wonderful opportunity given to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sampa, maybe I come here for just less than a minute. I thank Ambassador Bhatia. But, sir, there are questions in the chat box. We could not take them, as you rightly said, because of time. Questions I have seen from our partner think tank in CICP in Cambodia, Mr. Him Raksmi, and then Indronil Bole, Professor Uday Bhanu Singh, Professor Nomes, and Mr. Atul Kausik. All we could not address, but would you like to, sir, give maybe each panelist 1 minute time just to say their final word, or if they like to have answer to all of these questions, because they have also seen it in the chat box. And then we may come to Sampa to give vote of thanks, just for your consideration.
Sure, with pleasure. I have no difficulty. So let's start with once again the ASEAN side. John, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I have a minute to wrap up, and I see that there are many questions, and I also refer to Dr. Sampa's question on the geopolitical and geoeconomic, and which seems to be more prevalent in the region. But of course, we know that there's the ASEAN-China trade war, and that's also ASEAN-China rivalry that is beyond issues of traders. So I mean, both of these issues affects the region, but it seems that, I mean, from what I observe also from the US Indo-Pacific strategy, it seems that there are more concentration on political security issues in the Indo-Pacific rather than the economic side of things. Although we are also affected by that trade war and supply chains connectivity, that sort of things. So therefore, to end it off, I mean, I would like to end it off on a very positive note. There are many issues and there are many challenges in the region, but I would like to say that cooperation is always the solution to things. And, you know, we look forward to mainstream the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. I'm looking to Indonesia, who is taking the lead in that. I hope to see more concrete suggestions coming out to see how we can better synergize India's Indo-Pacific strategy and ASEAN's, as well as the rest of the ASEAN, other dialogue partners, and perhaps through the strengthening of the ASEAN-led mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Karisma, can you first go and then I'll invite the Indians?
Sure. Thank you, Ambassador. I think yeah, I've seen a lot of questions that has been left unanswered from the chat box. You know, this question about arms race, question about practical cooperation, question about whether the geo-economic dimension of things has overthrown geopolitics. You know, I think we're seeing incredibly high tendency of using economic instruments for political means. So, which is why I think my Singaporean colleague as well, I think from her presentation has been supporting like, you know, initiative like RCEP, because interdependence has always been the choice to you know, to avoid this tendency of using economic sanctions, because the more interdependent we are, the less we are likely to hurt one another with economic instruments. because we need each other. So these are hard roads. Not everything is preferable, but we're working on this. But on another aspect, I've also agreed with Ambassador Bhatia in the sense that we need to involve more private sector, more businesses, because we need to also push some of our initiatives between ASEAN and India from the ground up, because they're the ones that needs to be working, and rather than from government and initiatives all the way. So I think I end my note with that.
Thank you very much, Professor Panda.
Yes, on the question of geoeconomics and geostrategy, which I think some student from Bombay had raised, my simple answer, to put it very briefly, both are significant and both are complementary to each other. So any policy formulation need to keep that in mind. That is what I would like to submit.
Have you finished?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Williams?
I'll take this question. How does India intend to work together with ASEAN to navigate the US-China rivalry in the Indo-Pacific? I think much has to be done in terms of maritime risk reduction measures at sea, avoidance of incidents at sea, and also to bring in confidence-building measures between the two sides, particularly in the area of South China Sea. I think India and ASEAN have very important work that has been laid out. And also reaffirming the code of conduct of South China Sea, which ASEAN has been reiterating, and India should join in that in navigating the US-China rivalry in the region there. That's my response.
No, nee hoor.
Thank you. Thank you. Sampa?
Okay, thank you. It's now time to wrap up the session. And before I wrap up the session, I just wanted to highlight 2-3 issues that all of us, all the speakers, both in the inaugural session and also in the panel discussion, have highlighted. And those points are ranging from the civilizational linkages between ASEAN and India to the contemporary era, which is basically the issues like fintech, educational technology. Then we have digital health and other technological aspects. We have the maritime security issues, maritime domain, and we have also discussed about sustainable development and how India and ASEAN can work together for sustainability. We have spoken about ocean sustainability, which is again very important arena for the contemporary time. So on that note, I now would like to thank each one of you who have contributed for this webinar. And I would like to start the vote of thanks with Chairman RIS Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Director General RIS Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Dr. Prabir De, Coordinator and Professor at RIS, Coordinator of ASEAN-India Center. My special thanks to His Excellency Mr. Ong Shin, Ambassador, Royal Embassy of Cambodia to New Delhi, and Ambassador Jan Khobragade, Indian Ambassador to ASEAN Indian Mission to ASEAN, Jakarta. Without Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, this session would not have been possible. So our special gratitude to you, sir. And my sincere thank to all the speakers, Ms. Joan Lin, Professor Rajaram Panda, Mr. Wafa Karishma, and Dr. Lawrence Prabhakar Williams. Finally, I would like to thank our team here, the IT and tech team at RIS, and our colleagues at ASEAN-India Center, and all other colleagues who have joined from different other institutions. So without your gracious presence, this webinar would not have been possible. And I really hope that this series, we have other plans and we will be organizing more other webinars on the same lines. So we do hope that we will be staying in touch with all of you, and we'll have more such webinars and fruitful discussions in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Namaskar. Thank you, Sampa. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Panelists.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you, Prabir.
Thank you,
Thank you
Ambassador.
very much.
All the best to you.
Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.